Hello my loves, welcome back. I can't remember what book it was that made me realise the kind of books that get very popular on TikTok are usually not for me. I think there have been a few that I've read that I thought sounded good. I was excited to read because of TikTok, and then I've just been incredibly disappointed. So I've kind of come to learn over the past however long those recommendations just usually aren't for me. They're usually not my thing, and that's okay. However, I am also nosy and incredibly curious, and if I keep seeing something being talked about, I eventually want to know what it is and want to read it. So I thought, what better way to satisfy my curiosity than reading a ton of book talk recommendations in one go. I specifically picked books from different genres because I knew if I just picked, for example, a load of romantasy, I was gonna get bored very quickly. They were gonna feel very samey, and also where romantasy isn't a genre that I particularly enjoy very much, aside from like a few times, a few exceptions to that, I knew I was kind of just setting myself up to read books that I didn't like. So I purposefully tried to pick a selection of different genres, themes, moods, whatever you want to call it. I also purposefully did not pick books that I knew I wouldn't like because I'm not here to just shit all over books. Well, not all the time, but right now. Some of these are old favourites of book talk that I'm just super late to reading. Some of them I've only seen people talking about more recently, so there's a nice variety in here. The first book is Magnolia Parks. I don't have a physical version of this book, and it's been a while since I read this, so I don't actually remember the author's name. I'm really sorry. As always, all of the books and authors that I mention in any video are always in the description though, so you can find it there. I had not really seen a huge amount about this book. I'd seen it occasionally, and then when I was looking more into it, I found there is actually quite like a strong loyal fan base for this book on TikTok. And this series of books, I didn't realize this is quite a long series. I only read the first one. For all those people who absolutely love it on TikTok, there was also an equal number of people who absolutely hated it. I'm sorry to say that I am falling in the camp of hating it. Let me explain why. I don't even really know why I picked this book to read, honestly, because it doesn't really seem like my kind of thing. It was described a lot as being like made in Chelsea vibes. Is that what it was described as? I don't know. Those kind of shows though, those kind of rich people reality TV shows where it's just all about drama and relationship. What actually made me want to read this book was the cover, because I could not work out whether this cover was like beautiful, artistic, interesting, different, or whether it was just like weird and one of those cut and paste collages you make at primary school when you're just presented with magazines and you have to stick stuff together. You know, I couldn't work it out, and so it intrigued me, and I was like, right, okay, I'll pick this one to read then, because I already had it on my Kindle. The cover and the fascination and interest I had on the cover was the only thing that was interesting about this book to me. In summary, if you don't know what I mean by made in Chelsea rich people reality TV show, this book is essentially just two characters, Magnolia and BJ, were in a relationship, are no longer in a relationship, still like each other, are just really toxic to each other and ruin their own and everyone else's lives. That's the whole book. There is no plot. There doesn't seem to be any character development. It's just page after page of repetitive drama between these two people. That's all it is, with no redeeming qualities really about either of them. So it's not even like you're rooting particularly for either of them or for them to get back together. It's just exhausting. I'm saying all of that. I didn't actually finish this book. I don't, as a rule, DNF books, not for any particular reason, just because I just struggle with it. I don't know why. I just like the completion of finishing a book, so even if I'm hating it, I don't DNF books. This I DNF'd, which I think just goes to show how much I did not like it. I put this book down at about 60%, didn't come back to it for a few days, and realised I really did not care what happened in it. I had absolutely no interest to discover more about these characters or what happened. I did Google what happened afterwards just because I was a bit curious, and it honestly made me quite glad that I did not finish the book, because I would have just been annoyed if I had finished reading it. I don't really know how this is a full series. Like, it's what, like 6-7 books? I don't actually remember. It's a lot of books. I don't know how there's that many of them. Like, literally, it's, you get chapters from both of the people, the main characters' point of views, and it's just them being like weirdly codependent best friends, very unhealthy friendship considering they used to be together, then having an argument over something, hating each other for about 5 minutes, and then being best friends again, and then just constantly pining over each other but pretending they're not, and then having another argument, and it's just that over and over again. And I can't imagine the rest of the series of books would be any different, so I will not be reading these further. The only highlights that I have from this book that on my Kindle are just pointing out continuity errors in it. It was just like the author was writing and didn't go back to check it, and like this book wasn't edited at all, because there was like one part where Magnolia's thing, oh, I'd forgotten about this. Magnolia's thing is that she likes fashion, so every time she meets someone, whether she's known them previously or not, just anytime she comes into contact with another person, there is a paragraph of her pointing out every single thing they're wearing with about 20 different designers' names in it, 500 different adjectives, and it's just boring, and just after the first few times, unnecessary. That's the only way they demonstrate she likes fashion, by just her being able to provide a very annoyingly over-the-top description of what every single person is wearing. But anyway, she loves fashion. She always wears dresses and skirts, and there's this one chapter where BJ makes a whole deal about her wearing trousers, because oh my god, she never wears trousers, that's insane. And then a page later she's suddenly wearing a skirt. They're in the same place, they haven't gone anywhere, she hasn't got changed, but just it was the fact that they made a whole big deal about her wearing trousers and then all of a sudden she's not anymore. It was just very strange. There was just these weird errors that made me think, has this actually been edited? Has anyone actually read this? Is this a first draft? Because this is just stupid and doesn't make sense. Yeah, I would not recommend this book. I can understand why some people would enjoy it. I don't particularly like those kind of reality TV shows either, so maybe it's just not my kind of thing. Yeah, we were off to a bad start with this book talk recommendations reads, the first one being a DNF, but I did not let it get me down. The next book is The Silent Patient by Alex. I'm sorry, I don't know how to say your last name. This was a popular pick on TikTok a very long time ago at this point. I am aware of this. This has been sat on my bookshelf for months, like a very long time, and for whatever reason I just didn't pick it up. But I wanted something very different after the shit show that was Magnolia Parks, so I decided to pick this up because it's a thriller. It would be very different vibes, and generally I had only seen good things about this. If you have missed out on The Silent Patient, essentially a psychotherapist, whose name I don't remember, goes to work at a secure inpatient unit for women who have committed crimes and have been placed in a psychiatric facility instead of going to prison. He's weirdly obsessed with one woman, Alicia, who is in there after allegedly killing her husband, but after she killed her husband, she never spoke again. She never said a single word, hence she's the silent patient. He's like weirdly obsessed with trying to help her and trying to help her speak, so he goes to work there specifically to work with her. Now, the good things about this book, it was quite easy to read. I generally find thrillers quite easy to read. I got through it quickly. I wanted to keep reading it for most of the book, which also made it easier to read, and it was somewhat enthralling at some parts. I was curious and wanted to know what was gonna happen, which is what you want from a thriller. I wasn't ever necessarily like on the edge of my seat or tense or anxious or any of that, but generally it held my interest quite well generally. For the bad things, I'm sorry, the more I thought about this book, the more I actually got a bit annoyed at it For the bad things, my main complaint about this book is the fact that the main character is a psychotherapist and how that is like portrayed in the book. I checked my dude Alex's Wikipedia page. Apparently he did train in psychotherapy. I would be very curious to know, A, did he finish his training? B, did he just do the training and then stop working? Or C, did he work as a psychotherapist for a while, and if so, how long for? Because this was so inaccurate that I genuinely thought this man must have never had any exposure to psychotherapy before. Apparently he has though. I just, personally, I can't imagine it was very much. It was like the most cliched psychotherapist I've ever read before. Like, he was meeting random people and being like, I wonder what happened in their past to make them this way. That's not what therapists do. Obviously, therapists are empathetic and they have a certain interest in helping people and in mental health, but as with any job, when you are done with the job, you leave it at work. If you're a good therapist, because if you didn't do that, you would burn out and be exhausted. So the majority of therapists will not be analyzing people in their personal life unless it's like someone really close to them and they're like, look, maybe you could use some help for this, but it's not going to be from me. You know, that's just incredibly unrealistic, and yeah, it would just be exhausting if you're constantly trying to work out everyone. I would just like to caveat that by saying as well, I've worked in mental health for 7 years. I'm not a psychotherapist. It's never really clarified what kind of therapist he is, but anyway, I wouldn't class myself as a psychotherapist, but this world is very familiar to me, which is why I have so many problems with it. Another, like, just big issue was, again, the lack of understanding or like research, I suppose, maybe, that would have been done into the treatment in these kind of inpatient units, specifically the medication, because this woman, Alicia, was on quite a high dosage of an antipsychotic. Our psychotherapist friend here comes in and says, you need to reduce that so I can get her to talk. And the psychiatrist just goes, yeah, sure, I'll drop it to barely nothing overnight. Which you wouldn't do. She'd been on this medication for a very long time. You wouldn't just half or less the dose overnight when it's that high of a dose. Even if it wasn't that high of a dose, you wean people off medications slowly, and even that can be difficult. So that was very unrealistic, and then she was just fine with that, by the way. There was no withdrawal effects, no negative effects from her just suddenly having her medication removed. That was just very unrealistic and bothered me. It just screamed of someone who has no idea what a psychotherapist does, which is why it surprised me so much that apparently he had training in it. But anyway, that was like my main problem with the book. But also, that ending was disappointing as hell. I've somehow managed to avoid spoilers for this book, so I genuinely went into it not knowing what was going to happen. I had maybe somehow worked out or thought, oh, that might be what happens, but it was almost like a bit of a cop-out of like, I need to have a really clever twist that no one's gonna guess. You know, like Pretty Little Liars? We need to have something that the fans have never guessed, so we're gonna have a random British twin that no one's ever heard of before, just to shock people. That's what this felt like. There could have been so many other answers that made sense and actually would have been more satisfying, but this almost did just feel like it was going for the shock value. I don't know, some people loved it, the twist. I personally did not. All in all, there were problems with this book, as I've just listed there, but it was generally like quite easy to read and somewhat enjoyable. So I think I rated it like 3 stars. It wasn't amazing, but it wasn't awful. If you like thrillers or you haven't read many thrillers and you'd like an introduction to them, I don't think this would be a bad one. I think it was alright. It was just okay. The next book is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This is another like really old book talk rec that's kind of been there for ages, and you know, I think generally is kind of always up there as a book that people love and would really recommend. It's been on my TBR for a really long time, not just because of that, but because my older sibling really loves this book and they kept telling me that I needed to read it. They actually gave me this copy to try and convince me to read it about a year ago and I finally got around to reading it. I would just like to apologize before I give this summary of my bad potential pronunciations of ancient Greek names. Greek mythology is not really something I'm particularly familiar with. I've never really delved into it too much. My experience of a lot of this book was not really knowing how to say or read anyone's names. So Patroclus, is that how you say his name? I don't know, I'm really sorry. But he is a young prince who as a child is exiled from his father's court and sent to live in the court of Achilles' father. And him and Achilles over the years grow quite close. Then the Trojan War happens and the stresses and the strains begin to form, and it's a war, so things are difficult and it's sad. That is the summary of this book. I think everyone knows this book is sad at this point. That's nothing new, but yeah. I knew I was gonna like this before I read it. I didn't actually know what was gonna happen in it. I had managed to avoid spoilers, and because it was recommended to me by my older sibling, whose recommendations I generally whose recommendations are generally quite good, I knew I was going to like it, or had hopes I would like it. Also, it's a sad book. I knew it was a sad book. I like sad books. I was not wrong. I loved this book. It was really, really, really good. So much emotion packed into 300 pages of a book. I'm always very, very impressed when a book manages to create rich characters, good plot and storytelling, and develop those attachments to the world and the characters in a short standalone book. I remember saying this about Cemetery Boys as well, that I was very impressed by how much I cared about these characters and how much I was affected by what happened to them. I liked the writing, I liked the pace, I wanted to keep reading it, yeah, really enjoyed the characters. There was a lot of the time, and this is just me, where I'm not familiar with like Greek mythology or anything like that. A lot of the names of people just kind of went over my head because it was very different processing in my brain of trying to work out how to pronounce these names and like store them in my memory. So I was a bit confused some of the time because I couldn't remember who was who, especially because some of the names were quite similar. But I think that's a me problem. That's not a problem with the book at all. That's just a me problem. And there were like some jokes in there that I knew were funny and I knew were relating to like certain big figures in Greek mythology, but because I don't know a lot about it, I didn't quite get them, but I knew it was funny, so I could still enjoy it. Basically, if you don't know much about Greek mythology, don't let that put you off. You'll still really enjoy this. It's very accessible and it doesn't feel like you need to know a lot before you go in. I know everybody knows that this book is sad, but my god, was it sad. I think because like there's such a big deal about it being emotional and sad, I was kind of almost like, oh, I bet I'm not gonna find it sad because like it's been talked about so much that I feel like this must be like overhyped or over exaggerated. I was literally crying for the whole of like the last maybe 5-6 chapters, and it was one of those books that I just had to sit and process for a while afterwards. I just had to sit and think about it. We know I like books like that. I like books that affect me deeply and I have to sit and be like, whoa, what just happened? I would recommend this book to anyone. I rated it 4.5 stars. I could not tell you why it wasn't quite 5 stars. I could not tell you that. My ratings are just vibes and gut feeling. They're not particularly based on any criteria or anything. It was just not quite there, but it was still very, very good and probably could make its way into like some of my favorite books of all time, potentially. The final book is Powerless by Lauren Roberts. I again don't have the physical copy with me, so I may be wrong on that author's name, but my god, has this book been everywhere. It feels like every other TikTok I've seen recently is people trying to sell me the sequel to this book, and I know this has been big for a while, but I purposefully did not read it because of the title and the cover. I just didn't think I was gonna like it because of like the in-your-face marketing that has come from the sequel. I decided that I was gonna read it. I think it was either on Kindle Unlimited or it was like 99p, so I was like, fine, I'll just read it. Did I like it or did I not? I'm still honestly a little bit on the fence. So I genuinely had no idea what this book was about. Honestly, I hadn't looked into it at all. I didn't even read the blurb before I started reading it. I just knew the name and had seen everyone talking about it. So if you, like me, have been like that and you're not really sure what it's about, my best summary of this book, and this sounds like I hate it, but this is the only way I can describe it to give you a good idea of what this book is. The Hunger Games, but there is a severe lack of world building to make the games make sense. That is what this book is. It's like that classic romantasy of the fantasy is just kind of there as a backdrop, and the magic systems and world haven't really been thought of in as much detail as the characters and their relationships. I have problems with the characters too, but the thing that annoyed me the most is that, yeah, the focal point of this book is like these trials, which are so Hunger Games. I don't want to sound rude. They're such like a AliExpress Wish version, Temu version of the Hunger Games. So there's so many similarities between them to the extent where like it's incredibly obvious that they're not even just inspired very much like copying the Hunger Games, but just not in a good way. I don't remember where I was going with this sentence or why I started with that. The thing that bothered me most is that there was just no why for why these things were happening. Like, there was an attempt to explain why with the world building, but it just didn't make sense, and it wasn't really explained very well. Our main character, Payton, she is, I think, incredibly unlikable, but I don't think that's on purpose. I think the reason she's very unlikable is because it comes across very much that the author seemed to forget that people have emotions to every situation. They're overarching across all situations, especially when the situations going on in the story are somewhat complex. There's a conflict of interest for Payton in terms of being part of these games and coming from where she did in Loot Alley, which is the stupidest name for a place ever, but anyway. There's this conflict for her, but it's like it just vanishes at certain points. It's still there, clearly, because suddenly it's in your face over the top in other chapters, but it's just like she forgets about it in certain chapters when she's interacting with certain characters, and therefore it just makes it seem like Payton isn't a real person and doesn't have emotional depth. It just seems like she's a character being written for this scene, and she's not the same character that's then like feeling guilty about something or whatever in the next chapter. It didn't feel very connected. The love interest, what's his name, Kai? I sound like a broken record at this point, but this was another character who repeatedly is like, I'm a monster, I'm the worst person ever, I'm awful. And then he's just like really nice for the whole book. Like, yeah, admittedly, he does some not great stuff. It's still like so over the top of like, I'm the worst person in the world. And then he's just really nice for most of it and generally inoffensive. It feels very much like the authors are just like, this is a trope of like the dark kind of morally grey guy, but then they don't actually know how to write that properly. And they don't do it properly, and they're just using it as like a costume rather than actually using it as actual character development. So I think that's pretty standard from Romantasy though, so if you don't mind that, you'll probably quite like this book. The descriptions of things as well were incredibly frustrating. The way this read, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, was like every scene had been written in isolation, like at different points in time, and then they've all just been smushed together, but no editing has happened in between, because there were certain things that were repeated so much that would make sense if you were like just meeting this character for the first time or something like that, but they're just repeated over and over again, almost as if, yeah, I've written chapter 8 and then I've written chapter 1 and then I've written chapter 13, but I haven't worked out what's gonna like link them, so I've written everything and then just smushed it together, is what it felt like. I don't know if I've explained that well. The physical descriptions of people's eyes was just a constant. It was like every other page it was just about their eyes, and Payton describing Kai's eyes specifically, I'm not even joking when I say there was one paragraph that was like, his grey eyes were cold and yet had so much fire in them at the same time. They were, what was it? It's like, they were like icicles. but there was a harshness to them. But they were like the tip of an iceberg. And I'm not even exaggerating, that is literally what the descriptions are like. Like 20,000 metaphors or similes in a paragraph that just lose all meaning and also sound ridiculous. Like, I got very bored of hearing Kai's eyes being described as icebergs. I got very bored of it very quickly. All in all, writing was not the best, world building was not the best, characters were not the best. However, for some reason I want to read the second one. So again, this is just about like vibes. I didn't particularly enjoy it. I didn't hate it. This was another 3-star. I would probably not recommend it unless you like really love romantasy and like that's your vibe, your thing, which is fine. But I probably will read the second one for some reason. Like I am just about invested enough to care. Also, I think the second one is much shorter, which I very much appreciate because this was too long. This was like 500 pages and it really didn't need to be. But anyway, I probably will read the second one, but I can't tell you why. So yeah, that's where my vibes come in, and it's less about logical or critical thought. So yeah, all in all, I'm actually quite surprised because I expected to dislike a lot of these books more than I did. Obviously, I purposefully picked books that had a better chance of me liking them. I was expecting to be more like underwhelmed and disappointed than I was. You know, there was the DNF that I really hated, but then there was also 2 books that were like okay, they weren't the worst and you know were just pretty average reads, and there was a book that I absolutely loved. So I am pleasantly surprised. Maybe I will read more TikTok recommendations, who knows. If there are any really big TikTok books that you would like to see me read, or that you think I would really like, or alternatively that you think I would really hate, then let me know because I potentially might read more. I do have some more on my Kindle, but I've just not been reading them because I assumed I wouldn't like them. So maybe we'll do this again, who knows. But I have enjoyed this. It's forced me to read different things that I probably would have put off reading, so I am quite glad. And I'm glad I found some books that I really enjoyed. That is all from me today. I hope wherever you are, you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you guys soon. Bye.